Chapter 6. By next day, I had brought the whole lot of them into the house, into the kitchen with me. David's the one who told me about how they had to be fed every 2 hours, he said. I set them all down on the kitchen table, gave them some cereal, the same cereal I was eating. They loved it, loved everything about it. They ate it and walked in it, and they also pooped in it. Oh well, they were babies. But I couldn't go to school, not if they had to be fed every 2 hours. I settled down at the table with them smiling. They were all over the place, like little kittens or something. Oh my gosh! I whirled around. It was Dad, standing at the kitchen door, sleepy looking and panicky looking. What a mess, he said. I'm feeding them, I said, every 2 hours, David told me. Every 2 hours? Dad said. I nodded. They need a lot of attention, too. Dad came further into the room, frowning, scrunching up his nose. They need to learn where to poop, he said. I shrugged. They're just babies. What do you expect? Dad sat down, lifted a gosling out of the bowl in front of him, put him on the floor. They can't stay in the house, he said. I glared at him. They do. They have to, I said. They're too young. Owls and cats and stuff will get them. They'll die if we put them outside. Amy? Dad said. No, I said. I mean it. You said I could keep them. Dad took a deep breath. Okay, but... There was a sound outside, a bus honking, the school bus. That's your bus, Dad said. I'm not going, I said. Amy, Dad said. Then you have to promise me you'll feed them. I said. I'll feed them, Dad said. Every 2 hours? I said. And you have to promise you won't put them outside. Amy, Dad said. Promise, I said. Okay, I promise, Dad said. I promise. The bus was honking again. I looked down at the goslings scattered all over the place, on the floor, the table. Even a few of them had settled themselves like people on the chairs. I'll be back, guys, don't worry, I told them. I looked at Dad then. Are you sure you can handle this? I said. He pointed to the door. Go! I went, but I worried all day. I shouldn't have worried, though. When I got back, they were all fine. One thing I'm learning about Dad is that if he promises something, he means it. When I got home that day, he'd done lots of good stuff for my geese. First, he had cared for them all day. He had also gone to the animal regulation office where he met this guy, Glenn, who was an animal protection officer. He told Glenn about the goslings, and he promised to come out soon to teach me about how to raise them. After that, each day, Dad and David cared for them during the day, and then after school I played with them. It was so cool. They were only a few days old, but already they could walk and even run. But the best was they followed me. No matter what I did or where I went, 16 little goslings went with me. They lined up in a regular line like little kids in school, and when I ran and chucked to them or made clucked at them, they followed me. They followed me everywhere, up and over stone walls, through the grass, and everywhere. I didn't make them run far, though, or anything. They were still really little, and they got tired easily. The littlest one limped. I needed to watch out for him especially. I could tell Susan was liking them, and David was too. I wasn't so sure about Dad, though. He seemed a little grumpy about it, maybe because he made such a mess in the house. One afternoon, after we had a little exercise, David and I took them to the barn for a while. Susan was going to stay and make supper, which was fine with me. Dad's cooking was beginning to get to me. So, have you named them all? David asked. I nodded. Mostly all. That's Frederica, I said, pointing, and that's Long John and Stinky. That's because he likes to play in the mud. And there's Ralph and Muffy. I'm still working on the others. David reached down and very gently picked up the littlest one, the one that limped. What's his name? He said. I haven't named him yet, I said. Why does he limp? David asked. I shrugged. I don't know. He was born like that. I was thinking of Gimpy. David nodded, then set the gosling down very gently. Yeah, but he might get a complex, he said. Like that's his identity or something. Oh, I said. Yeah, I didn't think of that. How about Igor? David said. Igor? You know, Dr. Frankenstein's Igor? David got up, limped around, his hands drawn up like claws in front of him, his face twisted up, his head on one side, his impression of a limping monster. I had to laugh. Sounds good to me. Igor, it is. Let's go in for supper. I stood up, got on Goose's. Come on, Gooses, I said. I made this clucking sound, then made a little hey, 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 and they all came right after me, out of the barn and into the house. While we ate, the goslings ran all over the place. Susan kept picking them up, rescuing them from getting stepped on, but she was smiling the whole time. I could tell she definitely was beginning to like them. After supper, when Glenn got there, Susan made a great bowl of popcorn, and I sat in the living room eating it, sharing it with the goslings. I was happy to sit and just collapse in front of the TV. Being a mother goose was turning out to be a big job. David and Susan and Glenn sat behind me in the kitchen talking, but I could hear every word they said. It's amazing how they follow her, isn't it? Dad said. Did you see before? It's called imprinting, Glenn answered. The first living thing the geese see when they are born, they think it is their mother. They'll follow her everywhere. So they did think I was her mother? Amazing, Susan said. Well, they're creatures of instinct, Glenn answered, but all in all, pretty dumb. I looked over at him. Dumb? So how big should the cages be? Dad asked. Cages? Glenn answered. What cages? You know, Dad said, for the geese, for when they get bigger. Glenn threw back his head and laughed. No, you don't need cages. It's a lot easier than that. I don't follow, Dad said. Glenn laughed again, tucking his sunglasses into his pocket. Then he took out a pair of nail clippers and began clipping his fingernails. Right there at the table. Talk about dumb. He looked up and smiled at Dad. Okay, he said. First of all, you've got to understand that geese are very tough animals, like rats. Susan caught my eye. She raised her eyebrows. I just shrugged. We both looked again at Glenn. Right, rats, Glenn said. I mean, the way the geese have been displaced over the years, you would think they've been extinct by now. But they've learned to adapt, learned to find places to go. Like where? Dad said. Where do they go? Glenn nodded. That's the problem, he said. I get complaints all the time from them on golf courses or people's lawns. Ultimately, that's why the law was created. What law? Dad said. Domestically raised geese have to be rendered flightless, Glenn answered. It's Ontario Act 093-14. Glenn got up from the table, then came into the living room where I was. I reached out both arms, scooped my goslings closer to me. It's better known as pinioning, Glenn said. It's really a simple procedure. He reached down and snatched up one of the goslings. No, I said. Put him down, please. They're my geese. Glenn smiled down at me. It's Amy, isn't it? I nodded, but I kept my hand out for my gosling. The fact is, Amy, Glenn said, these geese belong to the crown. I looked over at David and Susan. They were whispering together as worried look as I felt. I turned back to Glenn. Crown? Crown who? I said. Glenn just laughed. The Queen of England. That's who, he said. And she made a law that we all have to follow for the good of the people. He was still holding my gosling. Muffy it was. He had her in one hand and the nail clippers in the other. It's really a simple procedure, he looked down at me, and really quite painless. He raised the nail clippers, stretched out Muffy's wing, and I jumped up. What are you doing? I yelled. Believe me, Amy, Glenn said, the bird doesn't feel a thing. Let go of her, I yelled. Stop that, Glenn, Dad yelled. Wait. Glenn put the tip of Muffy's wing right against his mouth with the nail clippers. That's when I hit him. I grabbed the popcorn bowl, hit him with it, bopped him right over the head, but he didn't let go of Muffy. For just a minute, he just stood there shaking his head, and then he bent to the clippers again. By then, Dad had come charging into the room and had grabbed Glenn around the waist, tying him up like a bear. I snatched Muffy from his hands, scooped her and my goslings into my popcorn bowl, and escaped with them up to the bathroom, where I locked myself in. Locked them in, too, safe. We were all safe. My heart was pounding like crazy, but we were safe. I leaned back against the door. Through the door, I could hear the fight going on. What do you think you're doing? Dad was yelling. I'm trying to help, Glenn yelled back. What do you think is going to happen with those birds? Fly. They'll try to migrate in a few weeks and be dead a month later. I bent over them, put my hands around them, hoping they didn't hear. "No, you won't," I whispered to them. "Don't listen to them." "I can't believe you're going to do that," Dad yelled back. "You listen closely," Glenn said. "Those birds could carry parasites and disease, and they could pass it on to the wild flocks. And that, my friend, is not going to happen on my watch. They're getting clipped, one way or the other." "Don't let me see you on my place again," Dad said. "Get out." "If those birds fly," Glenn said, "I'll confiscate them." "Stay off my property," Dad yelled. I heard him slam the door slam. Gone, he was gone. But he'd come back, I knew he would, and no way would I let him get my goslings. No way. If I had to stay in the bathroom with them forever.